Placemaking, place-based approaches. How does all of this relate to planning? What is it? Why does it matter? And how do we move forward and do it? I'm going to have a look at what place and placemaking is, how we've always been doing that as planners, what we're doing at the moment, and what can help us as we move forward in these approaches. Planning, I think, has its day-to-day basis in place. Much of what we do involves places and the impact that it has. Our purpose of planning is looking at the management of land and buildings in the long-term public interest. Managing land and buildings obviously ends up being part of what a place ends up looking like. Therefore, we've always had that inherent link into it. But being aware of the fact that we are there in the long-term public interest is another important aspect of place working and placemaking, because that's who we're making those places for. There's no one community that you can represent in doing that. There's a myriad of communities in any place, and it's planning's role to determine just what that long-term public interest is and to represent that. So, as I say, we have always been working in place and had an involvement in that. But we're not the only organisation, the only profession, the only function, or the only sector that is involved in the creation of places. Other professions and other aspects of the public sector, private sector, and the third sector all have an input in shaping the dynamic that makes up a place. So we can sit in isolation as planners and undertake our functions in our silos, always seeking to represent the long-term public interest. But we can do more if we look and see what other people's priorities are, what other organisations' priorities are, what other sectors are seeking to achieve, and balance that in moving forward with still representing that long-term public interest. Place making is looking at how we shape those places, is looking at that extra bit of thinking that we can do as we're creating and allowing and managing changes in land and buildings. Place-based approaches is a more formal way of working that is being adopted across Scotland now, that seeks to give a little bit more governance, a little bit more definition to how we can be pulling together and what we can be doing to make a difference and who we should be focusing, making that difference on. Why are we doing it? Why are we working and putting that emphasis on place? Place-based approaches as a definition begins with looking at all those organisations that can have an impact on place. All the public services, all the functions in local government, in central government, all the functions across key agencies, everyone within the public sector working in partnership together. Then there's the input of the third and the business sectors, again, who all have that input into places, into what we build and how we manage our land. Then, importantly, those who we're actually seeking to create places for. A place only becomes a place because of the people who are in it. Beyond that, it's just a space. So we work together with those communities as well in order to plan, design, resource, build, and deliver on services. And a unique aspect moving forward within place-based approaches could be said to be with a view to reducing inequality in life outcomes. I put it, and I'll be discussing later, that I don't think that's the case. I think planning has also always had a view to reducing inequality in life outcomes, and we're returning back to that within Scotland today with this approach. Reducing inequality in life outcomes means focusing in on those aspects in our community that are not experiencing the best opportunity to flourish and to have the maximum opportunity to increase their own life outcomes and to increase health and well-being and to have a lifestyle that promotes health and well-being. So place-based approaches, that's a big definition I've just covered. Put it as most simply though, it's simply about stepping out of our own small area and speaking to others, moving to a different function, a different profession and speaking to them, to a different organisation, to a different sector, and talking to others in an area that are also working on a same place. It can be literally that simple. I would say that planning has always done this because of its emphasis on place in order to achieve things. We have always talked to other sectors and talked to other functions in order to achieve things. However, we were really pushing forward and wanting to create successful places. It can mean more than just talking to one other person. It can mean quite a complex and actually quite a messy process that we need to go through. There can be so many players in a place that getting everyone together, sorting out all of the different priorities that everybody can have and everybody wants from that place, and finding commonality in those can most definitely be a messy thing to do. In the past, planners have been brought up on this really. Bournville, Port Sunlight, Patrick Geddes, those that we have studied in planning history have been about pulling things together where things have been messy and providing leadership to pull things through with a vision. But in planning, if we look as an example at Patrick Geddes, father of town planning, he had a holistic approach. It was not purely about planners doing everything. It was holistic with everyone involved and planning to increase the well-being of all people at all levels, from humblest to highest, with an emphasis in much of his work on those that were living in the humblest of conditions. There is no change to that as we move forward into the present. We now, beyond Patrick Geddes' days, have had a planning system since post-war, since it was introduced post-war. At that time, it was introduced to give people homes and to give them homes of value and quality that allowed them to thrive. Again, seated in promoting health and well-being and promoting equality, social equality for those within the country, knocking down tenements, building new towns, creating places that were better and better access to jobs, to healthy lifestyles, to communities. Where are we now? We are still working on that. It's not saying that everything has worked to perfection. It's an ongoing job. We still today are realising that we have more to do when it comes to urban design. How do we design our cities? We look at enhancing walkability, at building more compact neighbourhoods where it's easier for people to simply step out their door and have facilities and infrastructure at a walking distance. And we look likewise at enhancing connectivity and safe and efficient infrastructure that encourages people to have access to jobs and to facilities and to everything that promotes health and well-being. In the case of all of these promote more physically active lives, and they also promote more social inclusion and less social exclusion, where people are sitting isolated in homes where their main way of getting to and from something is in a car. If they are unable to have a car or to drive a car anymore, they can then really suffer from social isolation. Housing has always been something that planning has been contributing into, and on a place-based approach. As I say, post-war, it was about improving the quality of housing. Now, a major thrust for us all is about increasing of the availability of affordable housing. Without affordable housing, any household's income, the amount and proportion of which it is putting out on its own home and on delivering a roof over heads, means that income left over is leaving many households, even households in Scotland where both parents are working, the disposable income left after paying for the roof over their heads is meaning that they are living in poverty. Is an issue across Scotland is child poverty, and an emphasis across Scotland now asking all councils to produce plans to reduce child poverty. Planning is contributing into that now, in delivering and finding the sites to deliver more affordable homes. Planning has always impacted and input into our natural environment and its impact on our health and mental health and physical health, reducing environmental hazards, access to the countryside, and adaptation to the climate change that is going on within our world. So where are we going? Why the need for anything beyond what we've already been doing? There has been a shift in our place-based approaches over the years. Through the 80s and 90s, there was a massive injection of cash put into regeneration schemes, which enabled place-based working to move forward with the staff and dedicated teams that it can frequently require to achieve the greatest change. In a current climate with reduced budgets for the public sector, the opportunity for that kind of cash input into place-based working is far less available now. It's now looking to making best use of the resources that we have, and a better use of our resource can be joining together and working more collectively in order to get better use of that resource. It's still going to be messy. What gets us through that messiness is leadership. What gets planning through in the fact that now across Scotland we have one of the biggest opportunities for place-based approaches has just been introduced through the Community Empowerment Act. The creation of community planning boards that produce local outcome improvement plans means that the shift for planning is around the social outcomes in those plans. Community planning partnerships are the biggest set up of place-based approaches that we have across Scotland right now. And planning is being directly asked to take part in that, in their priorities, and to have their visions based in the priorities coming out of local outcome improvement plans. A profession that, in my experience for many decades, had much of its vision around economic growth is now being asked to look more at social outcomes and at its contribution to health, to well-being, and to reducing inequality. So how do we show that leadership within planning and taking part in those enormous place-based approaches? And how do we show that leadership in taking part in even the smallest of place-based approaches and even the smallest part of placemaking? To lead on this, Scottish Government have recently supported a place principle. That principle suggests that for any of us working in place, and planners by far would be one of the strongest professions that are doing that, is that we stop and think about everybody in that place, the communities in that place, but the other sectors that are working in that place as well. And as appropriate, we join up and talk to others and we work together around that place. That principle begins a leadership of just thinking and stopping and thinking about how we move forward beyond our silos and working more collaboratively. Having decided to do that and contact others, how do we shape that conversation to get the best out of it? The Place Standard tool provides 14 questions that shape a conversation around all aspects of a place, ending on a vitally important one around sense of influence and control. It's a fantastic tool to use to have a conversation with a community, but it's also a tool to use to have a conversation with any sector about a place. Having had that principle and shown that leadership to think and pull people together to have a conversation about a place, what then? The Partners in Planning website has tools and criteria and guidance on where to go next and what to do next. It has criteria there to assess what next should I be doing? Do we need to pull together more formally? Research shows that where needed to create a successful environment, pulling together as a group and creating a shared vision has far more success for individual sectors than working away in silos. That pulling together and giving some shape and governance to that organisation and process means that actions and delivery can move forward with a common goal and assisting each other. This all shapes to be part of the Partners in Planning website around knowledge, and skills and action. The knowledge and the skills for place-based approaches are something that planners have been undertaking for decades. The information on how that is shaping in the current perspective and environment of planning in Scotland is sitting there on the Partners in Planning website. Case studies of what others are doing and research into the impacts that it's had. What is required is action, and for myself that takes leadership from all of us to think about that principle, to start that conversation, and then to question how we can each contribute to moving forward with a place-based approach.